This is a worldwide list of people who were killed for being transgender. The list does not include suicides, accidental deaths, or premature deaths. Some of the perpetrators in these cases cite the trans-panic defense. Violence against transgender people is also known as trans-bashing. Background: the deaths experienced by trans people has served as an impetus to the establishment of the Transgender Day of Remembrance, T2R.in 2020. ABC News independently confirmed 34 violent deaths of transgender and gender non-conforming people in 2020 at the time of publication. This was published by Good Morning America. 1980s. 1988. Venus Stravaganza was strangled to death in New York City on the 21st of December. Her body was found 4 days later, shoved under a hotel bed. 1989. Carla Lee Salazar was found stabbed to death in her apartment in California. In 2014, Douglas Guttridge was charged with murder on the basis of DNA evidence. He pleaded not guilty and died in 2016 before the case came to trial. 1990s. 1991. Sonia Rescalvo Zafra, a 45-year-old transgender woman, was killed in the Parque de la Ciudadela by 6 neo-Nazi skinheads who kicked her and her friend Dory repeatedly in the head while they were lying on the floor. Her death encouraged the LGBT community to publicly fight against violence. 1993. Brandon Tina, a 21-year-old transgender man, was raped and murdered in Falls City, Nebraska on the 31st of December. 2 men were convicted of first-degree murder in the incident. The crime became the subject of the Academy Award-winning film Boys Don't Cry. 2000. Amanda Milan, a 25-year-old trans woman, was walking by Times Square, Manhattan, New York City, when Dwayne McCullough walked up and began to harass and threaten her. Milan stood up to him and asked him if he wanted to fight. Witnesses said he declined. As he walked away, another young man, Eugene Celestine, told McCullough he had a knife. McCullough grabbed it and stabbed Milan in the neck. A man named David Anderson reportedly helped McCullough escape from the scene. Milan died soon after at St. Vincent's Hospital. Transgender activist Sylvia Rivera worked towards seeing that Milan's death was investigated and organized Milan's political funeral along with other demonstrations claiming a disconnection of transgender rights from the larger LGBT communities. After Milan's murder, Rivera formed a transgender activist group, Street Trans Activist Revolutionaries, STAR. Rivera cited the crime among the reasons to add a broad definition of gender to the New York City human rights law. 2002. Gwen Araujo of Newark, California, died October 2002. A Hispanic teenage trans woman was killed by 4 men, 2 of whom she had had sexual relations with, who beat and strangled her after discovering she was transgender. 2 defendants were convicted of second-degree murder, but not convicted on the requested hate crime enhancements. The other 2 defendants pleaded guilty or no contest to voluntary manslaughter. In at least one of the trials, a trans panic defense, an extension of the gay panic defense, was employed. 2003. Nere E. Johnson was a 17-year-old African-American trans woman who was murdered along with friend Brandy Coleman in Indianapolis, Indiana by Paul Moore, who was initially sexually attracted to Johnson and then discovered that she was transgender, so he lit her car on fire while she was with Coleman inside. Janice Roberts was an American transgender woman who was kidnapped by serial killer William Devon Howell on the 18th of June. Howell later told an informant that he tried to engage Roberts in a sexual act and strangled her when he realized that she was transgender. Shelby Tracy Tom was a Canadian transgender woman working as a sex worker in North Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, who was killed by Jatin Patel on the 27th of May 2003. According to Patel, while having sex with her he noticed her surgery scars and he panicked as a result and strangled her. The prosecutor attempted to classify her death as a hate crime, but Supreme Court of British Columbia Justice Patrick Dom ruled that the crime was not motivated by hate because he did not know of her transgender identity when meeting her and thus could have not targeted her for it. Patel's defense attorney used a gay panic defense as part of his defense of Patel, who pleaded guilty to a charge of manslaughter and was sentenced to 9 years in jail. 2006 Gisberta Salles Jr., a Brazilian transgender woman, was murdered in Oporto, Portugal, by a group of 14 youths between 12 and 16 years old, who tortured and raped her for 3 days, and finally threw her, still alive, into a well over 15 meters deep, where she drowned. 11 of the minors received minimal sentences of under 13 months in a semi-open education center of the Instituto de Reinserção Social, and 2 received sentences of additional education. Her death became a symbol of the violence against women and the LGBT community, and shortly after laws protecting trans women were introduced in Portugal. 2007 Roberto, a transgender man, was killed by 2 women that had found refuge in his apartment, in Madrid, Spain. Both women had been mistreating Roberto physically and psychologically for a year, before they killed him on the 29th of August 2007 with a brutal hit on the head. Both women were condemned to 19 years of prison. 2008 Letitia King was shot twice in the back of the head in a class at a computer lab on February 12, 2008 at Echo Green Junior High School in Port Hueneme, California. She had made romantic advances towards Brandon McInerney, who was often teased as a result of her fixation with him. Prior to killing her, he had previously requested help in beating her up, but nobody showed interest. Angie Zapata was a trans woman murdered on the 17th of July 2008, in Greeley, Colorado. Her death was the first case involving a transgender victim to be ruled a hate crime. Colorado is one of only 11 states that protect transgender victims under hate crime laws in the United States. Alan Andrade, who learned 18-year-old Angie was transgender after meeting her and spending several days with her, beat her to death with a fire extinguisher. In his arrest affidavit, Andrade called Zapata "it," and during his trial a tape was played of a phone conversation in which he told his girlfriend, "Gay things need to die." Andrade's attorneys used a gay panic defense. On the 22nd of April 2009, Andrade was found guilty of first-degree murder, hate crimes, and car ID theft. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Latisha Tish Green was shot and killed on the 14th of November 2008 outside a house party in Syracuse, New York. Convicted of Onondaga County's first hate crime homicide, Dwight Ardley was motivated by anti-LGBT bias and his belief that Green was gay. Simi Lewis Williams Jr., a 17-year-old black gay man, was fatally shot on the 22nd of February 2008 in Fort Lauderdale, FL, USA. He was wearing women's clothing at the time of his death. 2010 Victoria Carmen White, a black trans woman, was murdered on September 12, 2010. Alrisham Chambers was brought to trial for her death, but he was acquitted. He blamed another man, Marquise Foster, for the murder. The only motive suggested was transphobic violence. The words, "You a dude?" were heard by White's friends, who were in an adjacent room shortly before gunshots were fired. 2011 Dee Dee Pearson, a black transgender woman, was murdered on the 24th of December 2011. Kenyon Jones confessed to the murder, telling police that he had paid Pearson for sex, and when he found out she was transgender, he became angry and killed her. Jones was charged with second-degree murder and armed criminal action and was sentenced to 30 years in jail. Svetlana, a trans woman from Moscow, Russia. She was beaten to death with a shovel by 2 persons, who had intended to have sex with her. It is suggested that after they learned she was transgender, they were motivated to kill her. Rita, a woman thought to be a trans woman by the killer from Umeå, Sweden. She was beheaded with 2 knives by a man with homophobia at an after-party in his own home. 2012 Agnes Torres Hernandez, a 28-year-old trans woman activist, was murdered on the 10th of March in Atlixco, Puebla, Mexico. 2013 Carmen Guerrero, a trans woman who was killed by her cellmate, Miguel Crespo, at Kern Valley State Prison in California's Central Valley. Evan Young, a black trans man who went missing on the 2nd of January, was later found tortured and murdered. A friend claimed 5 men were responsible. Island Nettles, a 21-year-old black trans woman, was beaten to death in Harlem, New York on the 17th of August after a group of at least 7 men accosted her and 2 of her transgender friends. One of the men, James Dixon, had been flirting with her. After he realized she was transgender, he struck her. After falling down, Dixon proceeded to beat her. She died of head injuries in hospital. Her death prompted a number of protests. On the 21st of April 2016, Dixon was sentenced 12 years in prison after pleading guilty to manslaughter. Dwayne Jones, a Jamaican 16-year-old, was beaten, stabbed, and run over by a car in Montego Bay on the 22nd of July 2013 after attending a party in women's clothing for the first time. 2014. Caribbean Kimberly Sodi, a transgender woman, was beaten and died of her injuries on the 31st of October in the Dominican Republic. Her killer was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Eurasia Kagla was fatally shot in Istanbul on the 21st of April, while another trans woman was shot but survived. Maya Devi, a 22-year-old disabled trans woman, was pushed off a moving train in Bangalore, India on the 24th of September. Geeta Baksh died following a police beating on the 23rd of October in Bahawalpur, Pakistan, that occurred while police raided her house. Police originally claimed her injuries were due to jumping from a moving police van but have since suspended the raid leader. Sabi Biryani was killed at her home in Georgia on the 10th of November by Levenko Klasvili. She had beaten another trans woman, Bianca Shigurova, that day. North America Anya Parker, a black trans woman, was murdered on the 3rd of October in Los Angeles during what police considered a robbery gone wrong, though the attackers did not take her purse and advocates believe she was targeted due to being transgender. Asia Jennifer Lauda was murdered in Olongapo, Philippines, on the 11th of October. Joseph Scott Pemberton was convicted of the murder. Pemberton reportedly killed her after discovering she was a preoperative transsexual. Mary Joana Nuevo was strangled and stabbed 33 times in the bar she owned in Lucena City, Philippines, on the 22nd of October. South America Marcela Duke was stoned to death by a group of attackers on the 9th of September in Medellin, Colombia. Pamela Moreno, a 24-year-old transgender woman, was struck by a vehicle and killed during an altercation and robbery in La Banda, Argentina on the 3rd of December. A police officer with a history with Moreno was charged in her murder. 2015. North America Ty Underwood, a black transgender woman from Tyler, Texas, was found in her car, dead from 3 gunshot wounds, on the 26th of January. Her roommate stated that Underwood may have been targeted because she was a transgender woman. Carlton Champion, a Texas college student who was involved in a relationship with Underwood and afraid of friends finding out about the relationship, was arrested, tried, and convicted of her murder. Brian Goleg, a transgender woman, was stabbed to death by her father, Kevin Goleg, on the 13th of February 2015. Goleg was a 22-year-old living with her father. She had previously identified as a trans woman, but returned to living as a man in the year preceding her death. Her father called 911 after the stabbing, claiming it was the cult that had broken in and stabbed his daughter. The cult he referred to is believed to be a local trans support group. Police determined that no one had broken in. Kevin Golek was charged with murder and felony domestic violence. In August 2015 he pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. South America. Fernanda Cody Olmos, aged 59, of Santa Fe, Argentina, was found in her Alfonso home stabbed and shot to death on the 25th of September 2015. Area neighbors and media believe the brutality of the murder suggests that this is a transphobic crime, a femicide against a transgender woman. Olmos had done charitable work during the dramatic floods that hit Santa Fe in 2003. Diana Sakayan, aged 40, of Flores, Buenos Aires, Argentina. Sakayan was a prominent transgender activist who served on the board of the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans and Intersex Association and was a leader of Argentina's anti-discrimination liberation movement. She was found in her apartment on the 13th of October with multiple stab wounds. Her death is being investigated as a hate crime. 2016. Asia Alicia, a 23-year-old transgender activist, was shot 7 times and died the 25th of May in the Lady Reading Hospital in Peshawar, Pakistan. Hospital staff spent over an hour determining whether to place Alicia in a male or female patient ward. Fellow transgender activists reported being taunted as they waited for Alicia outside the emergency room. Han Kader, a 22-year-old transgender woman, was raped, murdered, and then burned in Istanbul, Turkey. Her body was found on the 12th of August. Kader worked as a sex worker and was last seen getting in a client's car. She was also a prominent activist in the LGBT community of Turkey and had appeared in LGBT rights events in the country, including a 2015 gay pride event in Istanbul that was cracked down on by police. Europe. William Lund, a 30-year-old gender non-conforming person from England, suffered multiple stab wounds and died on the 8th of February at the University of Salford, where they had been a student. Raina Aliyev, a 25-year-old Muslim transgender woman, was killed and disfigured just after marrying a man in Russia. She was originally from Chechnya and her family had called for her execution. A permit had been issued prior to her death. Her killer's identity is unknown. North America. Mexico. Paula Ledesma, a 27-year-old trans woman who was rejected by her family and left her birthplace to become a sex worker in Mexico City, was shot on the 30th of September by client Arturo Felipe Delgadillo Olvera, who became angry after he found out that she was transgender. Delgadillo, an armed security guard, was released after a judge determined that there was insufficient evidence to judge him. United States. Raylan Thomas, a 28-year-old black trans woman, was shot twice in front of her mother, and then beaten to death by James Allen Byrd in Columbus, Ohio on the 10th of August, as she begged for her life. Byrd called her the devil and made transphobic comments. Her family called for the murder to be investigated as a hate crime, but Ohio hate crime statutes do not cover gender identity. South America. Brazil. Jessica Mendes Cavalcanti, 24-year-old trans woman, was surrounded by 2 young men and fatally stabbed to death in the Canada neighborhood of Uberlandia on the 19th of April. One of the suspects who was apprehended by police confessed that they had committed the crime because Cavalcanti was transgender. Lisa Fortuna, a 25-year-old trans woman, was stabbed in the chest, in Aracaju, Sergipe, on the 18th of October 2018. The aggressor said that if Bolsonaro was elected president, all trans people and transvestites would be killed. Bolsonaro did not comment on the subject. 2017. Asia Amna, 35-year-old, and Meeno, 26-year-old, both Guajasera Pakistanis, were allegedly beaten to death and tortured by Saudi police in Riyadh February 28. Their clothing and jewelry was also confiscated by the police. Jenda Sharmili, a 30-year-old trans woman, was shot dead in Karachi, Pakistan sometime on the 30th of August or early morning the 31st of August. She had been with a gathering of other trans people discussing what they believed to be a recent undercounting of Pakistan's trans community when a gang of armed men began harassing them and eventually shot Jenda. Europe Bianca, a 32-year-old trans sex worker from Caracas, Venezuela, was beaten to death by a 29-year-old client who was shocked by her masculine features. The incident took place in her house in Arnhem, the Netherlands, on the 29th of September 2017. North America. Mexico. Hilario Lopez Ruiz, a 26-year-old described in a local news report as a travesti, was found dead on the 15th of August inside a wastewater drainage hole in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. The news report stated that Lopez was beaten to death by a client who perceived Lopez as a homosexual man. South America. Brazil. Dandara dos Santos, a 42-year-old Brazilian trans woman, was tortured and shot in the face in Bom Jardim, a neighborhood of Fortaleza, on the 15th of February. The incident was filmed and published, which helped apprehend at least 5 men who attacked her. Wicca, a 40-year-old Brazilian trans woman, was attacked and killed on the 26th of March in Pernambuco, in the southern state of Lodeamento Luis Gonzaga. She suffered 3 stab wounds. According to a friend, she was murdered when someone realized that she was transgender whilst attempting to rob her. 2018. Asia. India. Following a false rumor that transgender women were kidnapping children for sex trafficking in Hyderabad, 4 transgender women were attacked by a mob on the 26th of May 2018. One of the women died. Local police issued an appeal to public saying that the rumors of criminal involvement by transgender women were fake and that the public should not take law into their hands so that innocents won't become a victim of those rumors anymore. North America. Mexico. Natalie Bryce Sanchez, an undocumented sex worker originally from Honduras, was murdered during a sexual encounter on the 19th of June in Tapachula. The client stabbed her to death after discovering that she was transgender. Alaska Contreras Ponce, 25, a transgender beauty queen and sex worker, was found dead with her neck sliced by barbed wire after torture in Martinez de la Torre, the 25th of July. Joanna Hernandez, a transgender woman, feminist activist and sex worker, was kidnapped, tortured and then killed in Jalapa, Veracruz, the 24th of September. United States. Kelly Stowe, 36, a black trans woman, was murdered in Palmer Park, Detroit in December. Albert Weathers, 46, a preacher, has been charged with her murder and prosecutors claim her gender identity was motivating in the crime. 2019. Europe. Nina Sergetskaya, 25, was killed by her boyfriend Mikhail Tikhonov, a doctor, in Kursk, Western Russia. North America. United States. In 2019, the American Medical Association called the violence against trans people an epidemic. Malaysia. Booker, 23, a black trans woman, was found shot and killed after a 6:40 a.m. shooting report call, Saturday, the 18th of May, Dallas, Texas at Tennyson Park Golf Course. There are currently no leads in the shooting. The shooting came just over a month since a nationally viral video showed Booker being publicly beaten and called slurs on the 12th of April. Police have no current ties to connect the previous assailant to her later murder. Less than a month before her death, she spoke publicly saying, "This time, I can stand before you, whereas in other scenarios, we're at a memorial." On June 5, 2019, a suspect was arrested by the Dallas police and charged with 3 counts of murder, including the murder of Malaysia Booker. Kiki Fanjoy, 21, a black trans woman, was shot and killed in southwest Miami-Dade County, Florida in the early morning of Wednesday, the 31st of July near an abandoned house. Miami police claimed the murder resulted from an argument and not a transgender hate crime. However, Fantroy's mother, whom she lived with, and others who knew her disagreed. Fantroy was reportedly headed home from a party with a group when a teenage male, 17, approached her and propositioned her for sex, which she declined, after which he began shooting at another member of the group. Fantroy ran, pursued by the young man, who then opened fire and murdered her. On the 5th of August, the suspect was arrested in connection with an unrelated case, and admitted to the murder in police custody. He has been charged with murder, second degree, and attempted murder. On the 31st of July, Elizabeth Warren spoke out about her death along with the death of Denali Stuckey, see above. B. Love Slater, 23, a black trans woman, was found immolated inside her car Wednesday, the 4th of September in Clewiston, Florida. Arriving on the scene in the early morning, officials state the body was burned unrecognizable. However, family and friends identified her from the location and car, which was confirmed the 6th of September by police in a report which did name the victim. Some reports indicate the victim might have been bound and shot prior to immolation, however those reports remain unconfirmed. No motive or lead has been determined at this time. Those close to the victim have stated they suspect her murder was likely due to her trans status. Nikki Kuhnhausen, 17, a white trans woman, was murdered by David Y. Bogdanov. Her body was identified from decayed human remains on Saturday, the 7th of December in the Larch Mountain area near Vancouver, Washington. Authorities were able to identify the body as Kuhnhausen from personal effects. Subsequent examination showed she died from strangulation. Kuhnhausen had previously been missing since the 5th of June, reported 10 June, when she left with a David Y. Bogdanov, 25-year-old male, who has since been charged, second degree, in her murder. Authorities currently believe the suspect, looking for a sexual encounter, became enraged upon learning of Kuhnhausen's transgender status. Spurred by the case, on the 26th of February 2020, the Washington state legislature passed the Nikki Kuhnhausen Act, outlawing the use of panic defenses based on gender and sexual identities. The act preempts the trial of Kuhnhausen's alleged killer and thus prevents the use of that defense. Mexico. Carly V.G., a transgender woman and sex worker, was stabbed to death by a group of people in the downtown of Oaxaca on July 15. La Becky, a 52-year-old transgender woman who owned the local gay bar La Esquina del Chacal, was killed in the Minatitlan shooting on April 19. 3 armed men broke into a family gathering and murdered 14 people, including La Becky. Jesusa Fidel Ventura Reyes, better known to her friends as Chucha, was a 25-year-old trans woman who was killed in the Mexican state of Veracruz. She went missing on the night of May 17, and her family contacted local police 24 hours after her disappearance. Local authorities found her severed head in a cooler in front of the town hall. Her body was found discarded in a street elsewhere in the city. Witnesses report seeing a group of armed men leaving the cooler outside the town hall. Ray's family first identified her on Sunday, May 19, and claimed her body on May 20. Brian Sanchez Zarate, better known as Brittany, was a 20-year-old trans woman who was killed in the city of Misantla in Veracruz. On May 26, she was shot by 2 men with .38 calibers on the city's local football field. Sanchez Zarate had been previously crowned Gay Princess 2019 on Misantla's annual LGBT Carnival. 2020 Puerto Rico. Alexa Luciano Ruiz was fatally shot in Puerto Rico on February 24 after an incident in a local restroom. Carmen Yulín Cruz called attention to her death before the 2020 Puerto Rico gubernatorial election. Ms. Luciano was killed while the assailant men laughed at Serena Angelique Velázquez, 32, and Leila Pelaez, 21, both transgender women. were found murdered on April 22 in Humacao, Puerto Rico. They were burned to death. Ympy Mendoza Ocho, a 19-year-old trans man, was assaulted 5 hours before his death and was later shot and killed on March 5 in Moca, Puerto Rico. Penelope Diaz Ramirez, a 31-year-old trans woman, was beaten and hanged to death at the Bayaman Correctional Complex, a men's prison, on April 13 in Bayaman, Puerto Rico. Michelle Ramos Vargas, a 33-year-old trans woman, was found dead on an isolated road after being shot multiple times on September 30, 2020 in San German, Puerto Rico. She worked as a bartender and was studying to become a nurse. United States. According to the Human Rights Campaign, as of July 2020, at least 26 transgender people have been killed, already surpassing the total from last year. Selena Reyes Hernandez, 37, was fatally shot in Chicago, Illinois on May 31 by a man she went home with, after telling him she was transgender. Russia. Valera, name is changed in the report, a 46-year-old man, a janitor, was killed on February 10 in Chelyabinsk, Russia, by his dorm roommates after they learned he was a transgender man. Mexico. Patsy Andrea Delgado, aged 42, was found dead on March 5 in Chihuahua City in Mexico. The police reported that she had been killed by blows to the head. A hammer with traces of blood was found near her body. The Comité de la Diversidad Sexual de Chihuahua, a local LGBT rights association, said that her killing was a hate crime. Netherlands. Özgüler, aged 25, was a Dutch trans woman of Turkish descent living in Leidschrigen, Utrecht. She was stabbed to death by her ex-boyfriend. She is the first transgender person in the Netherlands to die as a result of violence in 2020, according to Trans United Europe. See also: References. External links.